comfy, everybody. Okay. So looking at this, okay, since we just talked about you guys are going to review proportions on your own, I am not going to spend as much time teaching you and reviewing with you the proportions because you guys are going to do that already. My main goal and my main focus here today is to show you how to use the colors, okay, and then more importantly to show you how to deal with things that have transparency or reflection. So in this particular arrangement, the plate underneath is completely silver. In fact, I Windexed it yesterday, shined it up real nice. So what we're going to do with that is just make sure that when we paint it, we're painting what we actually see and not what we know is actually there. This is the time of year when people start saying like, oh, well, can I use the silver paint? No, you cannot, okay? The reason is you're going to end up with a flat and oddly metallic looking object rather than what you actually see in real life. So it wouldn't look realistic anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to start with first is establishing my proportions. So I am checking the height. I'm looking at the top of the pear all the way down to the plate underneath the pear, and for me that is this big. Can you see that in the camera? No. Probably not.
No.
Okay, well, that's okay. And then I'm comparing that to the width. So if I leave the same measurement, it's looking almost twice as wide as it is tall. Okay? So now if I go by the width, for me, from the edge of the silver plate to the far edge of the book, okay, that is this wide. Now if I compare that to my height, okay, it's just almost at the halfway point, okay? And I'm using true vertical and true horizontal, even though for my angle here, I see that platter and that book as a little bit of a diagonal, and I see the pear and the book into the platter as a little bit of a diagonal as well. So it's really important that when you're doing your proportions, and you'll review that when you do that Google Classroom assignment, that you work with horizontals and verticals when you're comparing height and width so that you can keep that consistent. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I am going to use a yellow to get my guidelines in. I'm not starting with pencil or anything like that. Also, on your practice paintings, I'm not concerned with your composition, okay? So just kind of make it as big as you can on the canvas that you're working with so that the focus is going to be on your proportions and then also your colors and how you're working with those highlights and shadows, okay? I'm going to arbitrarily say that the width is going to be from here to here. So this would be the end of the platter, and this would be the end of the book. Now, if I look at this, okay, I need to see where is my halfway distance. So halfway is about here between these 2 points. Can you see this yellow on the camera okay? Do I need to go darker?
You can see it, yeah.
You can see them? Okay. So my halfway point, even though my paintbrush isn't going to be big enough to get the whole thing, if I just visually look and say halfway is about there, I can measure that distance with my paintbrush here. Okay? So I know that the height needs to be about this big from the top of the pear down to that line of the plate that falls vertically right under the pear. Did I lose anybody yet? Good. You got to speak up if I lose you so that I can spin around and catch you again. Okay? So arbitrarily, I'm going to say that looking at from my angle where this far side of the plate is, if I go straight horizontal across from that, okay, that's where for me the book hits. So what do I mean by that is this for me and this point right here where the book and the plate intersect are directly horizontal across from each other from where I'm standing. Does that make sense? And for me, that point here is directly under this point of the pear. So that's what I'm looking at when I'm looking at vertical is like this, and then horizontal is looking like that. Okay? So those comparison points are important because if I know that my plate is going to end here, okay, then I know that at some point that plate is going to cross where the book is. And I lied, that's not right under the pear, it's a little bit to the side. I'll check that angle in a minute. But anyway, here is my halfway point. Here is that measurement. And then up from there, so if I go based on about here, okay, up from there gives me about to here. Okay, so I've got top of the pear where the book meets the platter. I've got the end of the platter, and then over here would be the end of the book. Now what I'm going to check, without dunking my keys in the paint, is I'm going to look from here to here. How big does that width, okay, compare from here to here, okay, or from the whole thing? So from my vantage point right now, here is the whole width. This is the book, end of the book, all the way to end of the platter. And then on there, here is where this point happens. Okay, so how do I compare that to this? Okay, that's about a fifth. It's a little bit less than a quarter. Okay, so if here's my whole thing, here would be a quarter. It's a little bit less. Somebody answer that, please. It's a little bit less than that. So actually, this would go right about here. Okay, so I'm going to ignore that part. I'm going to go right to here. Does that make sense so far?
Yes.
I'm going to make this yellow a little bit darker, just so we can see it a little better on camera. Here's the end of the book.
I'm leaving.
Okay. You rage quitting on us? Here's the end of the platter. All right, here's the top of the pear. All right, now I'm going to do hands on the clock, and I'm going to go fast. Here is my platter line right here. This is about a 2 to 2:15 o'clock angle. So I'm going to look at where is my 2 to 2:15 o'clock angle. It would be right about there. I got to use this point right here, so that means this has to come up a little bit. Remember, this one I didn't measure anything. I just kind of eyeballed that from the beginning. So that means that's going to raise this part right here. All right. Platter is going to come around this way. I have to make sure that that wide point of the platter is higher than this low point of the platter here. You guys understand why that has to be? Okay. Make sure that you are checking those angles. I'm going to do the same thing for the top of the platter. That's about the same angle as here. Okay, I'm going to look at the height of my pear down to the platter, and I'm going to compare that now to the width of the book. And it's about the same. Width of the book is a little bit longer. So I'm going height of the pear, width of the book here, and that's about the opposite angle. That's about a 9:15 angle here. So it's got to go this way. And that crosses the platter here. Okay, how high is the vertical on the book compared to the pear? 1, 2, 3.5. So here's this height. This would be 1, 2, 3. Actually, that would be and about a half. So here's the height of the book. If I was doing this, I almost licked that. Gross. If I was doing this for like a real painting and not just for a demo, all of these measurements that I'm really only measuring once, I would be going back and double checking. Okay. Here's another, remember I said this was the end of the book? So the, nope, that's wrong. What's my angle? It's about 130. This has to come over a little bit. Okay, there's my book. Top of the pear is here. Height and width of pear. Pear is about 3/4 the width of its height. Here's the height. Here's the width. I'm gonna go about 3/4. Go about here. Hands on the clock. About 130 angle on the top of that pear. Sit about there. Notice that I'm using a pretty thick brush for these outlines. I'm not getting really picky about making sure those outlines are, you know, anything real specific. Because as you paint, you're going to kind of fine tune them anyway. Does that make sense? Okay, so I've got what could stand to be certainly adjusted still, but I'm going to dive into colors now that I have enough basic proportions to keep going. Any questions so far? Somebody keep an eye on time for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking first for my light values, okay? I'm going to start with my lighter colors. I'm going to start with some white. I see that there's definitely a highlight on this side of the pear. So I'm going to start with a yellow color. I know that there is also at least a little bit of green in there. Need to warm that up though. I don't care right away if it's not exactly the right shade. I care about values before I care about colors. Okay? I do care about colors, but I care about values first. Okay, now how does that compare to the lightness of the book? I'm squinting a lot at what I'm seeing because when you squint, it makes your eyes kind of blur what you see, and it forces you to focus on what colors and values are actually there, not what the object details necessarily are. So how does the book compare to the pear? No pun intended. It is a little bit lighter and it's a little bit duller. The pear color here looks more intense than the book. So I'm going to come in with a little bit more white here. Okay, there's a huge shadow happening here from this pear. What color do we work towards for shadows?
The opposite on the color wheel.
So I'm using a little bit of, can you see my palette in there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm using a little bit of the blue and red, and blue and red makes purple, and when we mix that with the yellow that we already had, we're going to get a nice dull grayish shadow color. If I was going to take more time on my proportions here, I would be checking the angle that that shadow actually goes in. But since I am not. Okay, I'm also noting that the shadow is duller and darker up under the pear compared to as it gets farther away. Okay? The book, the spine of the book has more red. Okay, it's a dull red, so I'm going to pull in that same color that I just used. I'm going to get something in there for the spine of the book. Okay, but when I'm looking at it now, it looks definitely redder than the shadow that I just had. So I need to add a little more red. So I went over that shadow, and now I'm going to put some of that back in right here. All right, but it doesn't make sense that the shadow here would be darker than the book. So I've got to darken that back down. Are you getting the sense that I am not afraid of making mistakes here?
Yeah.
Good. Because you shouldn't be. Okay, this part of the book that's facing me, okay, when I squint, that's really, really dark. I'm not mixing large amounts of any of these colors, okay? I'm not really concerned with getting the exact color exactly correct. I'm just kind of mixing as I go. Because what's going to happen is your color is going to look one way on your palette. It's going to look totally different on your canvas because of what's around it. And what's more important, how it looks on your palette or how it looks on the canvas?
The canvas.
Canvas, right.
Oh, you have like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Less than. Said less than.
Okay, I'm going to jump into the platter, okay? The cool thing about objects that are reflective, and the reason that I started with the book here, is because I'm seeing a lot of the book reflected in the platter. You have to focus on what you're actually seeing, okay? When you use a reflective object and when you're painting a reflective object, you're really painting the reflection more than you are the object, if that makes sense. So for me, I see right here is kind of where that curve starts coming around, and I'm seeing this lighter red of the book reflected in that little part there. I'm focusing on what shape does that color actually take. It's kind of a long drawn out triangle that gets darker as it comes around. So I'm going to have to darken, it's really watery, I'm going to have to darken this part here. Okay, I also see the darker part under the book, which is really dark. It's darker than the book itself, or the shadow on the book itself, under here. So remember, I kind of started out with the lighter part of the pear, and now, this has to be way farther down. Now I've gone all the way to the dark values. I've also got dark values underneath. I don't know if you guys can see, but like from where I'm standing, the rim of that plate is very, very light right on the edge, but it's dark above and below it. So I've got some red here that's a little bit lighter. And then my darks kind of come all the way to that. There's a little bit of a gradient there. Okay, moving over this way, I've got this dark here, okay? If I squint and I go above that, it's almost a similar color to what I've got on the brick or what I've got in the shadow of the pear. So it helps a lot to kind of compare your colors and make similar colors similarly, if that makes sense. If I think about what that plate is actually reflecting, okay, it's reflecting the wall color. Okay, so that can help you kind of come up with a good base color, because sometimes when we mentally just think of it as, you know, oh, it's silver, sometimes that can be really difficult to actually figure out what color to start with. The good news is, notice I said what color to start with. So I know I'm not just going to nail it on the first try. I'm just going to get something in there so that I can see and compare, and then I'm going to adjust. And it's paint, so we can do that easily. So I'm really focusing on where do these shapes of color intersect and at what point do they do that. So with this one, it kind of gets, for me, which might be a little bit different than what you see on camera, which is certainly going to be different than what you see from where you're sitting. I see a dark area here. It gets lighter here. Okay, there's a gradient there. I've got really light right here. So now's where I want to make sure that none of that yellow from what I initially did is sticking around. I want to make sure that that gets taken care of accurately. Okay, and then over here, I see a little bit of that kind of teal color from the lamp, because some of that is being reflected. And then there's a little bit of it up here. I'm not washing my brush out a whole lot for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it helps keep balance between the colors that I'm using. But then also, it just helps the colors stay more accurate because I'm sticking within the same family of colors. Okay, behind this, I know I'm gonna run out of time here. I've got that green paper. Okay, and this might not look like much right now, but as soon as I put in some of this green, brighter. It's going to start making a difference with how you see that object. You guys have questions? You guys are like ninjas packing up back there.
You're gonna end up painting like the shadows in the background though, right? Like is that
Yep.
Or do you just okay.
Yep, you'll paint everything that you see. Now, like where that cord is back there, I would probably just squint and approximate for what I actually paint versus what I see. I'm also paying attention to where this shadow is. That's a hard edge on that shadow, so I softened it too much, so I need to come back in and refine that a little more. All right, I will do another one of these 6th hour, and I will post them both for you so that you get to see both.
Our students to the main office, please. Bradley King, Austin Thielbar, Jonathan Crow, Amanda Fredrickson, Haley Dable, Lacey Theobald, Nick Giabroni, Cameron Ritter, Jonathan Provost.
You can
to the
stop
office,
it, I'll
please.
stop.